that even Jesus would never forgive what you do. Let me ask you one question. Is your money that good? Will it buy you forgiveness? Do you think that it could? I think you will find when your death takes its toll, all the money you made will never buy back your soul.
February 28th, 1993. In the tumultuous aftermath of the massacre at Ruby Ridge, the ATF, seeking to fix their public image, set their sights on the Branch Davidians. The ensuing result eclipsed Ruby Ridge in infamy and became one of the most devastating human rights violations in American history. This is the story of the Waco Siege. The Branch Davidians trace their roots back to the Seventh-day Adventist Church, a Protestant denomination with a strong emphasis on the apocalyptic themes of the Book of Revelation and the imminent return of Jesus Christ. In the 1920s, a Seventh-day Adventist named Victor Houteff developed his own interpretation of these themes, claiming to identify specific figures and events described in Revelation. His beliefs, compiled in a manuscript called the Shepherd's Rod, were dismissed by church leaders, leading to his expulsion in 1930. Undeterred, Houteff established his own sect, initially called the Shepherd's Rod, but later renamed to the Davidians. In 1935, the group purchased a property outside of Waco, Texas, which they named Mount Carmel, after the biblical site associated with the prophet Elijah. Under Houteff's leadership, the Davidians grew significantly, eventually gathering 100,000 followers. However, the movement fell apart after Houteff's death in 1955, as disagreements over leadership and doctrine emerged. One of the key figures in the Davidians was Benjamin Roden, who claimed to have received new revelations from God. Roden established a splinter group called the Branch Davidians, with a looser interpretation on Scripture. Houteff's wife, Florence, predicted the end of the world in 1959, which just clearly did not happen, and that led to the group splintering again, and then Roden eventually bought the Mount Carmel property for what remained of his group. After Benjamin Roden's death in 1978, leadership of the Branch Davidians passed to Roden's wife, Lois. During her tenure, a young man named Vernon Howell joined the group in 1981. Howell, later known as David Koresh, quickly rose to prominence due to his charisma, musical talent, and claimed prophetic revelations. Lois' son George Roden had a mutual rivalry and hatred for David Koresh, which probably wasn't helped by the fact that Koresh was having regular sex with his mother. George took over power from his mother in 1983, but was insecure about Koresh's extreme popularity amongst the congregation. The rivalry between Koresh and George escalated into violent confrontations, including a bizarre incident in which George dug up a corpse and then challenged Koresh to a contest to resurrect the dead. In 1987, Koresh and his followers armed themselves and attempted to gather evidence against George, which then resulted in a gunfight at Mount Carmel. Although nobody was killed, it led to a trial between the two, where Koresh claimed that he only shot up in the air to avoid hurting anyone, and he got acquitted. George took a different route, and he made a series of threats to the jurors, the lawyers, the judge, and just anyone in the general vicinity of the courtroom. He would later be convicted for murder and sentenced to an insane asylum. By comparison, all the jurors came down after the trial and gave Koresh a big hug, and he invited them all to an ice cream party at Mount Carmel. It was at this point that he renamed himself David Koresh, symbolically linking himself to King David and the Persian King Cyrus, and he also declared himself the Lamb of God, mentioned in Revelation. Unlike traditional Christian interpretations, which identify the Lamb as Jesus Christ, Koresh taught that the Lamb was a separate figure tasked with opening the seven seals and heralding the end times. This was his justification for preparing for an apocalyptic battle against the forces of Babylon, which he wasn't entirely wrong about. Later on, the media would try to paint the Branch Davidians as a doomsday cult intent on self-destruction, but they were actually focused on holding out for as long as humanly possible, intent on surviving the coming apocalypse. Now, to understand David Koresh, we're going to start at the very beginning. Koresh's childhood was a difficult one. Bullied for his speech impediment and suffering from learning disabilities, he found solace in religion. Raised in a Seventh-day Adventist church, he claimed from a young age that God communicated directly with him, granting him revelations about the Bible. To further his beliefs, when he preached, his stutter completely disappeared. At age 19, Koresh approached the church's pastor, claiming that God had commanded him to marry the pastor's daughter. When the pastor said no, Koresh responded by getting his daughter pregnant. His appeals to church leaders for permission to marry her were denied, leading to him being kicked out of the church. Koresh journeyed the globe for a while in an attempt to recruit followers, visiting countries like Israel and Australia, before eventually returning to Texas. And once again, when Koresh was 39 years old, he claimed he had another divine command, this time telling him to marry a 14-year-old girl, which was a decision that her father signed off on. Well, it's technically legal in Texas at the time with parental consent. It's just disgusting and extremely disturbing and bad. I don't like that. This gets a thumbs down from me. But throughout all of this, Koresh seemed to genuinely believe what he was saying and genuinely perceived what he was doing to be part of some twisted divine mission. Now that kind of catches you up on David Koresh and how he rose to power and the kind of person that he is, evil but very charismatic and buying his own hype, which is a dangerous combination.
What about these people here?
Those people here are people, well, you know what they think of me? They think I'm the son of God.
Do they?
Yeah.
Is he the son of God?
I hope he is.
Then in 1992, all the followers of George Roden, who was the guy that David Koresh got in a shootout with, and then they had the whole trial, and George Roden threatened everyone in the courtroom, and later went out and murdered a guy, and then was sent to jail for that. That dude, that guy, all of his followers started accusing the Branch Davidians and their compound of child abuse and underage sex at the compound, and that shocked the Waco community and drew intense media and law enforcement attention, obviously. And there was multiple investigations by CPS, Child Protective Services, and a bunch of other agencies, and they found no evidence to substantiate any of the claims.
For a couple of years, in fact, we had the Department of Human Services go out and interview some of the kids and whatever they could do. I had people go out with them to interview. To this day, we don't have a case that we can make against Vernon Howell or anyone for child abuse. Even though the news media here and other people kept saying this is what happened. A man from Australia said this is what happened. But we could never get them to give us anything more than just, we know that's what happened. You have to have proof.
Turns out it was just them making up stuff because they were pissed that George Roden was no longer running things for the Branch Davidians.
Around 1987, Mark Bro, a self-proclaimed prophet from Honolulu, Hawaii, joined the Branch Davidians at Mount Carmel. He was asked to leave in 1989 when he tried to take over the leadership of the Mount Carmel Center from David Koresh. Mark Bro vowed revenge. He called several international agencies and made allegations against David Koresh of adulterous sex, child abuse, and gun stockpiling. In 1992, Mark Bro was provided a golden opportunity to get his revenge when a disc jockey named David Jewell became embroiled in a custody battle with his wife, Sherry Jewell, a Branch Davidian who lived at Mount Carmel. Mark Bro approached David Jewell's mother to tell his sordid tales of sex, abuse, and guns.
And despite CPS and all the other agencies going in and checking it out and making sure there was no kind of trafficking or any of that stuff going on, proving all that false, public opinion began to shift against Mount Carmel and the Branch Davidians. A bunch of sensationalist media coverage depicted Mount Carmel as just a fortress of depravity, and Koresh was not helping matters by continuously claiming to be the Lamb of God and then going out and marrying multiple people.
People say you've been sleeping with the women here. Is that true?
No, only one. And she's tired of it. Now, I mean, she's tired of the accusations.
We also put to Koresh claims that he had sex with children and underage girls.
Did you do it?
No, I didn't do it.
And this is kind of the part where the ATF starts to come in. One of the Branch Davidians ran a licensed gun store called the Mag Bag, selling guns at trade shows and legally manufacturing ammunition. They kept everything strictly legal and above the board, and they kept meticulous records which the government had full access to. Now, in February of 1992, a UPS driver reported seeing suspicious items, such as dummy grenades, which are a common novelty item that's really popular at gun shows, and something that he thought was black powder in a package destined for Mount Carmel. Now, this report reached the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms and Explosives, or the ATF, prompting an investigation. So the ATF reached out to a local gun store to ask about the Branch Davidians, and they told them they were exemplary gun owners and had even worked with them in the past. Not trusting this, the ATF reached out to the local sheriff, who said, yeah, never had a problem with them, they're great. And then the ATF finally decided to talk to Koresh. Koresh openly invited the ATF to come in and gave them full access to all of Mount Carmel's inventory and paperwork, but for some reason, the ATF said no. Instead, the agents rented a house across from the compound, posing unconvincingly as college students. Now, mind you, these guys are in their mid to late 30s and all dressed identically and drove identical black cars. So Koresh immediately knew that these guys were undercover agents, but as was the practice of Mount Carmel, he didn't care and he welcomed them in anyway and just allowed them to hang out with the Branch Davidians. One of these undercover agents was Robert Rodriguez, who reported seeing a bunch of AR lowers, aluminum blocks, and toy dummy grenades, all of which are completely legal and very common for firearms businesses to own. The Branch Davidians frequently ordered firearm parts such as lower receivers and assembled them into complete rifles. It's basically like Legos, where you can mix and match the different parts to create a unique combination that's personalized to you. For an AR, the receiver is the only part that's officially considered a gun by federal law, as that's where the trigger and the firing mechanism are. Once you buy that, you can customize your rifle by adding on all the other parts, which are legally just considered hunks of metal. Now, the Davidians, through their licensed firearms dealer, operated entirely within the law. They maintained records, performed background checks, and sold assembled firearms at gun shows. However, the ATF viewed the receivers in their possession as potential tools for illegal activity, despite lacking any form of evidence to suggest that they wanted to make illegal firearms.
What the search warrant found was gun parts. It was the duty of the ATF to show that those gun parts were owned with an intent to create illegal weapons. I'm not a lawyer or a judge, but my reading of the warrant does not convince me that that intent was there. All gun dealers stockpile weapons. All gun shops stockpile weapons. We call those stockpiles an inventory.
How can one use firearms as an investment?
The guns that he was buying would go up in value, no question.
Okay. And do you know other people who do that?
Yes, sir.
It's not uncommon by itself, is it?
No.
Basically, it's like if I was to walk into your kitchen and see that you had butter knives, and then say, you must be trying to stab me to death, which, funnily enough, is what the Nazis tried to throw Albert Einstein in prison for. As a whole, the ATF's investigation went way beyond firearms and into stuff out of their jurisdiction, which is also highly illegal.
My investigations convinced me that David Koresh was guilty of statutory rape. But I don't understand why 2/3 of the search warrant is about child abuse and statutory rape when the ATF has no jurisdiction over those offenses.
It cannot be overstated how hated the ATF was at the time, following the Ruby Ridge incident in August of 1992. I did a whole video on Ruby Ridge, so I'd recommend checking it out for an in-depth look at the event, but it was another situation where the government screwed up and brought in a full-scale military invasion that led to the murder of an innocent mother holding her newborn baby and a young boy. After Ruby Ridge, public outrage against the ATF and federal law enforcement grew exponentially, with widespread calls for massive reform or even just the destruction of the agency. Eager for a gung-ho military-style victory to put them back in the public's good graces, the religious compound with the child abuse allegations that ran a gun store was the perfect excuse to roll out the tanks and a show of military might. The ATF needed a narrative to create this excuse, so they ignored or lied about several key pieces of information. Firstly, Koresh and the other Branch Davidians often left the compound, playing rock music at several bars and restaurants around town. If they would just wanted to arrest or question Koresh, it would have been so easy to do so at any time. Instead, they lied on the reports, and they said that Koresh and the other Branch Davidians always stayed within the compound and never left and were impossible to detain. Second, the ATF's reasoning for the search warrant revealed a complete lack of understanding or just basic competency with firearms, which is their whole job. For instance, the affidavit talked about disassembled AK-47 parts, specifically upper and lower receivers. Now, to anyone familiar with guns, that's just completely wrong. AK-47s have a single-piece receiver, unlike the two-piece design of an AR-15. At the end of the day, it doesn't really matter, but it's just another example of the ATF agents being completely incompetent.
The affidavit describes how an undercover agent had observed the upper and lower receivers of disassembled AK-47s. The AK-47 has a one-piece receiver. There are no separate upper and lower receivers on an AK-47. Obviously, Agent Aguilera didn't have a clue, and Magistrate Green failed to notice.
Third, the warrant cited a noise complaint from a neighbor who had reported hearing what sounded like automatic gunfire. Now, this claim had already been investigated by the local sheriff, who determined that the sounds were from semi-automatic firearms fired rapidly.
It's a little harder with this because it doesn't have the same kick as the Garand, but it's bump fireable. Let's see how we do this. Gotta use the belt loop for this one.
Full auto is illegal unless you have a tax stamp from the ATF, which you have to pay money for and file a bunch of paperwork. It's a whole thing. The Branch Davidians didn't have any full auto firearms. It was just semi-automatic fire that the neighbor was hearing, and the sheriff's report reflected that. But the ATF removed the sheriff's report from their warrant, making it seem like there was illegal activity. Fourth, where they talked about drug production or potential drug production, where they got that from was that David Koresh, when he bought the property, found a old meth lab there and reported it to the police immediately. That's it. Fifth, and finally, the ATF treated what was supposed to be a simple search warrant as though it was a military assault. Officially, all they were supposed to do was send a few agents to walk up to the door, hand them the warrant, and then just kind of look around the property. Instead, the ATF ran military-style training exercises, building an exact copy of the compound to run mock invasions onto, and they also sent in heavily armed agents with tags attached to them displaying their blood types like B negative or O positive, in case they needed to make a battlefield infusion. What should be as simple as handing over a few pieces of paper had escalated into a full-scale military assault on U.S. soil. Make no mistake, the ATF wanted blood.
Machine gun fire in itself is not evidence of illegal activity. It is legal to own a machine gun if the owner pays a $200 tax on the gun. But there was no evidence the Branch Davidians owned any machine gun at all. So, bottom line, the raid on February 28, 1993 was launched because the ATF merely suspected that the Branch Davidians might have a machine gun that they had failed to pay a $200 tax on.
And on February 28, 1993, the raid began. The local media had been tipped off about the raid and asked a post office delivery guy for directions to the compound, telling him that there was going to be a huge shootout over there. The delivery guy, who just so happened to be Koresh's brother-in-law, booked it all the way back to Mount Carmel to warn the Branch Davidians, and as soon as he arrived at the news, the people inside the compound began to panic, with many of them breaking out into tears or prayers. And as soon as Koresh was told, he ran over to ATF agent Robert Rodriguez, begging him to call off the raid, saying that he knew it was wrong and that there are women and children here. Rodriguez didn't say a word, instead turned his back to Koresh and walked out of the compound. Shortly afterwards, ATF agents arrived in force, traveling in covered trailers and completely surrounding the property, trapping the Branch Davidians inside. And now we come to the age-old question of who shot first. Of course, the ATF said the Branch Davidians shot first, and the Branch Davidians say that the ATF shot first, but the most likely scenario, and the one adopted by historians, is that the ATF's dog kill team, tasked with, as the name would imply, shooting the compound's guard dogs, initiated the shootout. Eyewitnesses said that they shot the dogs, which prompted a chain reaction of gunfire from both sides. So, same thing as Ruby Ridge. Koresh, who at this point had walked out of the front door unarmed with his hands raised as soon as the ATF pulled up, and attempted to call off the raid, telling them that there were women and children inside, which was something that the ATF was already very familiar with, and they shot him in the stomach and the hand. He retreated inside and closed the door. The ATF claimed that they did not shoot at him, but the bullet holes in the door clearly showed that the agents fired on Koresh when he was outside. This front door, a crucial piece of evidence, completely disappeared off of the face of the earth after the raid. According to one FBI agent, after the whole standoff was over, he saw a group of investigators loading the front door into the back of a U-Haul. Inside the compound, Wayne Martin, a Branch Davidian and an attorney, called 911 to plead for a ceasefire. He repeatedly said that the Davidians were under attack and that women and children were in danger.
Yeah, the 75 men around our building and they're shooting at us in Mount Carmel. Mount Carmel? Yeah, tell them there are children and women in here to call it off. I hear gunfire. Who is it? Wayne. Tell me what's happening, Wayne. There are women and children in danger. Wayne. I'm under fire. I'm going to call out. What? I'm going to pull back. I have a right to defend myself. They started firing first.
Despite these calls, the gunfire continued. The Davidians, believing they were fighting for their lives, returned fire from the upper floors of the compound. The ATF's approach to the raid demonstrated a lack of planning for de-escalation. Instead of seeking to avoid casualties, the operation was designed to force a shootout. Their decision risked the lives of over 100 people inside the compound, almost half of which were small children or infants, and created a volatile situation that quickly spiraled out of control. During the raid, the agents attempted to breach the compound from multiple directions. Helicopters were deployed, ostensibly to draw attention away from the agents on the ground, but survivors within the compound said that the helicopters were shooting at them as well. Agents tried to scale ladders to enter the compound's upper floors, but it quickly devolved into a deadly firefight. The Davidians, firing from inside the compound, pushed back the agents. The gunfire was so intense that some agents fell completely off the roof, and others were forced to retreat under heavy fire. By the end of the first day, the human toll was significant. 6 Davidians and 4 ATF agents were dead, with numerous others injured. The Davidians buried their dead in the compound cemetery, an act that tragically resulted in yet another death, when one of the unarmed, unsuspecting mourners was shot dead by an ATF agent. These events marked a grim beginning to what would become a 51-day siege. As news of the raid spread, the story captured national attention. What had initially been an obscure investigation to a religious group in Texas exploded into a sensational media event. The story of an open gunfight between federal agents and an armed religious sect drew journalists and news crews from across the country, eager to report on the unfolding drama, still fresh off the heels of the tragedy at Ruby Ridge. And now, as is standard protocol, as soon as a federal agent dies, the jurisdiction shifts over to the FBI. Specifically, the case was handed over to the Hostage Rescue Team, HRT team, the same unit that was accused of murder and human rights violations for their involvement in the Ruby Ridge Massacre, specifically FBI sniper Lon Horiuchi. This decision was controversial, and rightly so. The last time the FBI let these guys handle things, they wound up with 2 innocent civilians killed and 1 small child dead. Now, Koresh, who had been shot multiple times during the raid, initially reached out to local news outlets to share his side of the story. He said that the Davidians had been fired upon first, and that their actions were an act of self-defense. The underdog story immediately took root and rallied support with many Americans who had not forgotten the crimes committed at Ruby Ridge, which had happened less than a year ago.
Would you use a gun if somebody came in here?
They come in here with a gun and they start shooting at us, what would you do? Tell me, be realistic. This is America. This is not Australia. This is not Europe. This is not where a country overthrows a bunch of people, takes away their weapons so that the people cannot argue any issues. Did King David have swords? Did Jesus tell the apostles to carry a sword with you? Yeah.
Basically, the public sentiment was, great, they're doing it again. Now, to control the flow of information, the FBI cut the Davidians' phone lines and established a direct line of communication between negotiators and Koresh. This move silenced the group's ability to blow the whistle on the FBI's actions, making sure that the FBI had control over what information got out. As the standoff between the FBI and the Branch Davidians stretched on, David Koresh engaged in hundreds of hours of negotiation with FBI representatives. Their conversations ranged from the theological discussions to Koresh's personal reflections, creating a dynamic that alternated between moments of potential progress and deep frustration.
If you die, you tell me, if you die from that wound, I want you to tell me what's going to happen.
Well, I'm not going to be around anymore, am I, to influence anybody, right?
Well, David, listen.
No, Jim, listen.
This has been painful for us. Come on.
Listen, Jim. There's nothing that hurts me more than being called a co-leader, all right? If I'm wrong, people like me don't deserve to live, okay?
Listen.
You understand me, Jim. If you let the people think, because, they're all scared around here now. Don't burn our building down.
No, we won't do that.
Don't shoot us all up. They've got to have that time.
But David, if you die, you're leaving your people helpless.
Look, they're God's people.
But if
I'm just an instrument, okay? I show them out of a book what God teaches. It is for them to decide.
Despite the ongoing conversation with Koresh, the situation remained a stalemate, with the FBI encircling the compound and the Davidians holding their ground, prepared for an extended siege. Unlike traditional doomsday cults anticipating a specific apocalypse, the Davidians believed that their divine purpose was to endure whatever trials thrown at them, to hold out until Jesus' return. The FBI's complete and total failure to understand the group's mindset, which is their job, shaped the entire approach to the standoff. On-site FBI agents were saying the standoff was just like Jonestown, and they were confident that the Branch Davidians would either commit mass suicide or initiate a final deadly shootout. It was quite literally the polar opposite situation, but their willful ignorance was yet another screw-up that led to the final outcome.
I think in the case of the Davidians, if people had listened carefully to their rhetoric with an ear toward an understanding of religious apocalyptic language, would probably not have been worried about them using these weapons against their neighbor.
At one point, Koresh proposed a solution. He said he would surrender if the FBI played a message that he had recorded on national television. The FBI agreed and broadcast his message, only for Koresh to later retract his offer, saying that God wanted him to finish his writings.
He gave us his word that after the message was played...
Yes, but what if there is a higher power than you and I that speaks to an individual? If there is a God in this universe, and there's the laws of man and there's the laws of God, and this God that has led him all his life says to him to wait, what do you do?
We find no incidents, those of us who've listened to the negotiation tapes and studied the transcripts, of Koresh lying. On March the 2nd, he said he was coming out and then said God told him not to. If any lies were told, it was that, and we would have to know what God said to Koresh in order to call that a lie.
Do you people believe that Koresh is actually talking to God?
Koresh believes he's talking to God.
As conditions worsened, several mothers and their children wanted to leave the compound, which Koresh arranged with FBI negotiators. A total of 19 children, aged 5 months to 12 years, were sent out. along with several women. However, the FBI immediately separated the children from their mothers and then subjected them to intense and inhumane questioning. They interrogated the small children, asking them manipulative questions about sexual and physical abuse so that they could have something to take to their higher-ups and then to the media outlets to justify their actions. The FBI successfully shifted the narrative to allegations of widespread child abuse within the compound, suggesting that the children had been tortured or abused, which was later proven to be a lie in the court of law. In an effort to counter the negative media portrayal and the FBI smear campaign, Koresh requested a video camera to document the lives of those inside the compound. On day 9 of the standoff, the FBI provided the camera, and the Davidians recorded footage intended to clarify their beliefs and just kind of explain the situation to the general public. However, the FBI watched the video and refused to release the footage, saying that it would humanize the Branch Davidians and make the public think of them as people instead of just as monsters. They needed everyone to think that every Davidian within the compound was just pure evil, so that they didn't have another Ruby Ridge situation on their hands. The Waco Siege was supposed to be their comeback and their redemption in the eyes of the public. Some of the footage for the trapped Branch Davidians was later released online.
And bringing these tanks and stuff around here, I tell you what, being an American first, I'm the kind of guy that I'll stand in front of a tank. You can run over me, but I'll be biting one of the tracks. No one's going to hurt me or my family. That's American policy here. You could have arrested me any day as I jogged up and down this road. You could have arrested me going to town or going to Walmart. Waco was going to bear witness against the ATF. The two agents across the street over here, Robert Gonzalez, I love the guy. I was honest with him. I brought him into my home. He was going to stay there for 2 weeks. All this stuff you guys may want to avoid and deny. You know, he wanted to tour around the place. I promised him a tour. He could have talked to any of these guys around here, anybody. He was free to come and go as he chose. And I do not appreciate it, and never will I ever appreciate somebody coming here with 2 helicopters and cattle trailers and all that, and pushing people around with guns. Hey, I'll meet you at the doorstep any day. You know, and somebody will get hurt. If you want to keep playing that game, I'm talking to you. Somebody's going to get hurt. Because this ain't America anymore when the ATF has that kind of power to come into anybody's home and kick doors down and things like that. Now, I do understand, someone reminded me of this, I do understand that one of the officers says his gun went off on accident. And that, that was just like a signal and all that, But look, beside the point, ATF, you boys are wrong. Your practices, your habits, yeah. Drug dealers, fine. But even there's always a question, if there's any question whatsoever, the kids or women are involved, damn you, I tell you what, you keep your damn gun in your holster. You send a couple of big, brave, invincible kind of men, you let them knock on the door. If they're so damn involved to where they can risk their lives for the name of the law, then send them up bulletproof, put them in some kind of night armor or whatever, and let them knock on the door and ask the questions first. But no one's going to expect me, when they come busting in on my door with guns drawn and pointed in the air, and someone fires me, that I'm going to lay down and die for anybody. That just ain't going to happen in this country. You see this here? Hey, this is my family. It may not be like your family. It may not be like your family. This one here, he's my family too, right, Joseph?
Yeah.
Tell him, look in that camera and tell him what you think about it. Who's treated you good?
David.
Do you mind that, son? Huh? Do you love Joseph? Your best buddies?
Yeah.
You too, Damon? So, you guys, you do it your way, I do it my way. You got to argue with me, you catch me on the side of the road somewhere, you come and argue with me. You come point guns in the direction of my wives and my kids, damn it, I'll meet you at the door any time. And I'm sorry some of you guys got shot. But, hey, God will have to sort that out, won't he?
And what brings you all the way from England, a nice, lovely home of which I've seen and been in, what brings you to America, to a place called Waco, Texas, or Waco, Texas? Anybody want to speak first?
I've always wanted to know
to understand the Bible, and I wanted to know about the 7 seals. And I met somebody who can show me the 7 seals. I asked my pastors, my ministers. I was a former Seventh-day Adventist. Nobody could show me. And now I've found what I've been looking for.
We have no one telling the world our side. Watching the lies that the federal agents have told, it's astounding.
I'd like to share with you some of my family. And we just thought we'd kind of break the ice and allow people to see just exactly what kind of people we have here. I'd like to start off first of all with my oldest son. His name is Cyrus. Come sit over here, son. How old are you?
7.
7. Say hello to everybody.
Hi.
Wave at them. The camera right there.
Did Cyrus survive? Nobody on this tape survived.
Now, this created a divide between the negotiators and the tactical teams at the FBI. The negotiators said they needed more time and patience to talk to Koresh and his followers, while the HRT team, or the hostage rescue team, said that the standoff was dragging on too long and that they just wanted to go in and shoot the place up, which was also something they said at Ruby Ridge. As tensions rose, the FBI escalated their tactics to psychological warfare. Tanks repeatedly crushed the Davidians' vehicles, and then they tore up the graves in the compound cemetery and ran over the bodies with the tank. At night, agents shone bright spotlights into the building and played a bizarre mix of loud noises over loudspeakers, including old music, animal screams, and even dolphin noises.
Yes, right here.
Mr. Ricks, is there a consideration to use psychological warfare? Have you discussed it at all?
I don't know what psychological warfare is.
It was reported in the paper that you would play loud music, keep bright lights on the compound all night to try to agitate the entire group. Is that a possibility?
We will not discuss tactics of that sort, but I would say the chances are minimal of doing that type of activity. Yes, ma'am.
They also at one point just went out on the lawn and started mooning the families inside. And if they were on the fence about sending their children out to the federal authorities before, they definitely weren't going to send them out now.
They were mooning the women, for instance. They would drop their pants and bend over and bare their rear end to people that were looking out the windows, which was, not a situation that some of the women or even some of the men took too lightly, in the sense, well, do we want to send our children out to these kind of people?
Steve, every time we're aware of movement, we've told you about controlling these guys. I mean, if you got guys out there right now pulling their pants down, men that are mature, they're sticking their butts out in the air and flipping the finger. Give me a moment. See, the guys that gravitate toward, riding in tanks, jumping out of airplanes and stuff like that are a little different mindset than you and I. I agree with you. Right? I agree. So when they get a chance to use a Bradley, probably half of them have never been in a Bradley before. It reminded me of a lot of kids in there. Absolutely. An opportunity to, hey, let's drive this baby and see how it works. Sure, but somebody's got to be above these guys. Well, those vehicles and what they're doing do not show what is coming out of the mouths of some of you guys.
Also, the psychological warfare tactic makes no sense. If the FBI believed that Koresh was unstable and capable of leading his followers to mass suicide, then why try to freak out the paranoid cultists?
FBI push David or the rest of us to the limit. Did they want to create an incident? Did they want us to come out, crazy and start shooting so that they'd have an excuse to gun us down? We didn't know.
When I first was asked to be involved as a member of the panel, I thought the main problem was going to be understanding the psychology of the people inside the compound. But as I got into it, I quickly became aware that the psychology of the people outside the compound was more important to an understanding of what happened.
In response to the ATF blasting inhumane noises and sounds of the compound, Koresh and the rest of his band decided to have a music battle with the FBI and pulled out their instruments, hooked up their speakers, turned them up to maximum volume, and just started absolutely shredding, blasting rock hits from within the compound at the federal agents outside.
We need all the hope that we can get.
Again, I don't like David Koresh, and I definitely don't agree with any of the stuff he did, especially the leading good Christian people astray, but you cannot tell me that rocking out in the middle of an FBI standoff is not the most metal thing you've ever heard. You don't have to like the guy to admit that that's pretty damn cool. R.J. Craig, a member of the FBI hostage rescue team at Waco, told PBS he had his little band in there, and all of a sudden he starts playing, and we were 200 plus yards away, and we had to yell at each other to hear, and it went on for several hours, this concert, rock concert, just showing us that his speakers were more powerful than ours. Eventually, in response, the FBI cut all power and water lines to Mount Carmel. While the Davidians had prepared for a siege, 2 of their water tanks were damaged during the initial raid, leaving them with limited resources. This lack of basic necessities added another layer of stress to the already volatile situation. As the weeks dragged on, the standoff outside Mount Carmel turned into a surreal spectacle. While inside the compound tension and deprivation grew, outside the atmosphere resembled a bizarre carnival. Vendors sold t-shirts, protesters mingled with spectators, and some posed for photos alongside federal agents. At the same time, the FBI's containment strategy became increasingly opaque. Media access was restricted to a point several miles from the site, ensuring that the press could neither witness nor report on the FBI's direct actions.
We realize that you have the ability, and it's not below you people to do something like to erase all evidences. Why do you have the press so far back? You can give me any kind of crap you want. I know, you know. The reason we're not talking to the press is you people have got to cover your butts from what you did, and that's what's going on here.
Meanwhile, within the FBI itself, tensions were mounting. The hostage rescue team was restless and frustrated, and they were discussing potentially assassinating David Koresh, but they immediately threw out the idea because they thought that killing Koresh would trigger a mass suicide. In addition, pressure from Washington added to the volatile mix. Public sentiment, amplified by media coverage, increasingly called for a swift resolution to the standoff. Attorney General Janet Reno, under pressure from President Bill Clinton, argued that the standoff had to end fast, mentioning the debunked claims of child abuse and saying that she was afraid militias from other parts of the country would band together and come fight for the Davidians, which is patently ridiculous. She also said it was costing too much money, which that's really telling about her priorities. No problem wasting taxpayer dollars on a variety of kickbacks, but when it comes to actually saving American lives, then it's too expensive. Convinced that shooting up the place was the best option, President Clinton gave approval to escalate. On April 14th, Koresh signaled a breakthrough. He said that he'd received a divine message directing him to write his interpretation of the 7 seals of Revelation, after which he and his followers would surrender. At last, it seemed there was a way to resolve the standoff peacefully. The FBI provided typewriter ribbons, and Koresh began his work, producing what survivors later confirmed to be the promised writings.
On April the 14th, there was a major breakthrough, and that breakthrough was David Koresh's letter to me, which I promptly gave to the FBI, that said that he'd received his mission, that he was working on writing his interpretation of the 7 seals, and that everyone inside was relieved that they didn't have to die now, that the prophecies were not being fulfilled now, and that this would be resolved.
However, this progress was dismissed by the HRT and FBI leadership, who said that Koresh was just stalling for time.
The guy testified before the House hearings that the negotiations had reached an impasse. They told the Attorney General they weren't coming out, and that there was a stalling tactic, and they weren't working on the 7 seals. Their own negotiators had reached an agreement knowing that the first seal was finished, and in order to get proof of it, had sent in typewriter ribbons so that they could get that proof in their hands, and yet the very next morning they launched the gas and tank attack.
Despite the fact that they were finally actually getting somewhere with negotiating, now that Bill Clinton had given the go-ahead order, the FBI was getting prepared to attack. And on April 19th, 1993, the 51st day of the siege, the FBI launched a final assault on Mount Carmel. Tanks equipped with CS gas began systemically punching holes in the walls of the compound, pumping in the noxious substance. The gas was devastating, seriously injuring and harming the women and children inside.
And I can just see those kids barfing, vomiting, screaming, because you can't possibly have a gas mask that'll fit a little kid.
Didn't their report say that gas masks don't fit on these babies?
That's correct.
And didn't they know that?
They should have known that.
In an attempt to escape from what the FBI had effectively turned into a makeshift gas chamber, the women and children retreated to a bunker within the compound. Once they'd gotten inside, the tanks destroyed the bunker's entrance and the underground tunnels, trapping those inside. Meanwhile, the CS gas, when exposed to heat, produced a form of cyanide gas, which was lethal to those inside. Amidst the chaos, some members of the Davidians waved white flags and banners, begging for the FBI to turn the phones back on, trying to call out for help. Their desperate cries for help were ignored. Around noon, a fire broke out within the compound. The blaze spread rapidly, engulfing the entire structure in flames. Survivors later reported hearing the desperate cries and prayers as those inside attempted to escape. Of the 85 Branch Davidians alive that morning, only 9 people survived. The exact cause of the fire remains a contentious issue. The FBI said that the Davidians sent the fire themselves as part of a mass suicide, which, again, was a severe misunderstanding of the Branch Davidians. Later investigations uncovered that the FBI had fired explosions into the compound after filling it with flammable gas. Remnants of 40 Mike grenade canisters were found in the aftermath, despite multiple FBI and ATF agents saying in a court of law that they had not fired explosives.
20 seconds after the 2 gymnasium flashes, still more automatic gunfire can be seen coming from the field to the left of the demolition tank. This pyrotechnic projectile is one of 2 found in the rubble of Mount Carmel. It's a 40-millimeter military device that's fired from a handheld grenade launcher. This one was found here, near the corner of Mount Carmel where the first fire started. The other was found here, in the kitchen dining room area.
At one point, the FBI asked them, do they have fire extinguishers? And Schneider sends someone to check and comes back with the report that there's only 1 fire extinguisher in the building. The FBI negotiator's response is, somebody ought to buy some fire insurance.
Is there any doubt in your mind or the Justice Department's mind that the fire was set by the cult members?
I have absolutely no doubt at all that the cult members set it based on all the information that has been furnished to me.
David Koresh and the Davidians set fire to themselves and committed suicide. The government did not do that.
In the aftermath, it became clear that many of the deaths were due to suffocation, cyanide poisoning from the burning CS gas, or gunshot wounds, likely mercy killings among those trapped. Koresh himself was found dead, a mercy killing from his assistant, who then took his own life. The few survivors brought with them the manuscript Koresh had been working on, proof that if the FBI had just waited a little bit longer, or if Clinton hadn't given that order, everyone could have lived. That's perhaps the most heartbreaking part of it, how unnecessary the deaths were. It could have all been easily avoided so many times, but they willfully chose to keep putting them in danger until they got the result that they wanted. The ATF and the FBI got their blood. The FBI's initial reaction to the tragedy was nothing short of sheer joy. Agents raised a flag over the compound's ruins, treating the operation as a military victory.
As soon as the Branch Davidian Star David flag had fluttered to the ground, they ran the ATF flag up on that flagpole as a symbol of a military conquest, because the whole world saw this as a symbol that the battle was over.
Agents rushed over to pose for photos with their guns over the bodies of charred and dead children and removed key evidence, such as the front door, which was smoking gun evidence that the FBI had shot first.
The thing that really concerns me is why the building was so totally destroyed afterwards, after the fire was out. There was no firefighting whatsoever attempted, and then the crime scene, and it was a crime scene, was totally, absolutely destroyed. And I've seen this happen before.
Did you see the FBI changing the crime scene in any way?
Yes, sir. As I had said earlier and didn't get to finish the answer, they were moving the vehicles, which destroyed valuable trajectory evidence. And in the end, it turned out it didn't matter because the
but it didn't seem to be standard operating procedure. You don't consider that standard operating procedure, do you?
Certainly not in any crime scene I've ever been on. No.
The government framed the deaths as a mass suicide, a narrative that dominated early news coverage, and tried to shift blame entirely onto the Davidians.
David Koresh and the Davidians set fire to themselves and committed suicide. The government did not do that.
Later investigations revealed the scope of the massacre that took place. Reading the news articles and the coverage from the event back then is just so frustrating, watching Time Magazine and ABC and NBC and all those news outlets attempt to paint the agents as righteous saviors, when just days earlier, they were mooning the now dead children in the compound, the same agents who took group photos over their charred bodies. It's nothing new, but it never fails to make me sick seeing the amount of corruption within the news agencies, which has always been there to some extent, but it's just easier to see it now. In the aftermath, the surviving Branch Davidians faced legal repercussions, with 12 charged for crimes such as aiding in the murder of federal agents and manufacturing illegal weapons. While 4 were acquitted, 8 others were convicted on related charges, serving varying sentences until their eventual release in 2007. As more evidence emerged, the story surrounding Waco grew increasingly complex. Audio recordings surfaced in which David Koresh said he only needed 2 more weeks to complete his interpretation of the 7 seals. Instead, the FBI gave him 3 days before their final attack.
And then he said, the word came to him and said, write, and he wrote. This was brought out the day of the fire by one of the survivors. He was keeping his promise of April 14th. We believe they would have all come out safely.
This was pulled out of the fire. The tapes were, and then this was written up as evidence that he was working on that message on the 7 Seals.
Things are supposed to happen in this country is when someone's suspected of a crime, even if it's child abuse, even if it's capital murder, we give them a trial. A jury finds them guilty beyond a reasonable doubt before they go to sentencing. Then a jury or a judge sentences them, and an appeals court makes sure the trial was conducted with due process. And then and only then do we kill them. We don't kill them first, like happened in Waco on April the 19th.
But the agents at Waco named themselves judge, jury, and executioner. They ended the siege in a fiery catastrophe, a fate that many considered to be one of the worst ways to die, a crime against humanity. In every possible metric, they failed the people that they swore to protect.
I was a lawyer, and I had David Koresh's grandmother with me, and I wanted to see about talking to her. And after a few minutes, another one came up to me who was obviously the guy in charge and was very surly, and declined to give me any information at all. So I started to leave, and just as I left and turned my back and started walking toward my van, I heard a voice say, coming from one of those people, I don't know which one, but one of them said, "I hope she has told him goodbye." That was the mentality of the people who were guarding the gates. Those were federal law enforcement authorities. And their attitude was, we are going to get revenge against David Koresh, and if that means we have to eliminate all of them in there, that's just fine too. That was the attitude that they had.
The aftermath of Waco did little to provide clarity or closure. Missing evidence such as key autopsy footage and the infamous removed door further muddied the waters.
And kept in contact through the White House counsel. I'm sure the White House counsel advised the president.
We're missing some of your telephone logs, particularly April 17th, 18th, and 19th, and our problem is that they've all been redacted. And is there any chance that we could get those?
Joe will give it a date back next time we come to your office. We in fact suggested we would go to Waco and collect the tape from them. And they said no, it's the San Antonio office. And at a certain point along this discussion, they finally said the tape is lost. We can't give it to you.
Lon Horiuchi, an FBI sniper who killed the wife holding her baby in the Ruby Ridge incident, had shot and killed unarmed Branch Davidians who were fleeing the fires, though they could never pin the murders to him, as he rebarreled his rifle immediately after the siege ended. For those of you who don't know what that means, rebarreling a rifle basically makes it impossible to trace the ballistic evidence back to Lon Horiuchi and the rifling of his gun. For some in government, Waco was considered a victory, a political tool that they could use to pass bills, like Bill Clinton's 1994 assault weapons ban, which also backfired and resulted in rising crime. The real victims of this tragedy, as always, were the innocent, especially the children caught in the crossfire.
Like them or not, or like what we do for a living or not, they've been law enforcement officers, some of them, longer than I've been alive. And with that comes a lot of experience. What I'm saying is, you have to trust the people in charge.
David Koresh and the Davidians set fire to themselves and committed suicide. The government did not do that.
I'm low in the food chain, so I'm standing by what they did, because I do what I'm told as long as it's legal and moral.
My God, torturing babies and saying it's part of their job and saying it's okay because their parents were bad. Our whole society is structured around the notion that if parents are bad, we protect the children even against the parents. In this case, the FBI and the government took the position, why, not only do we not protect the children, we use them as an instrument to try to get their parents to do something. We'll torture them so their parents will do right. Oh, my God, where did they think that up?
As one of them afterwards said, Livingstone Fagan, who lost a wife in the fire and his mother in the fire, he said, those of our people who died are highly honored in heaven, and so we should not worry about them. The thought was that the army of Babylon would kill them, as perhaps it ultimately did.
Their loss is a stark reminder of what happens when humanity and reason are eclipsed by a thirst for blood and political aspirations. The Waco Siege was a failure on multiple levels. The FBI's willful ignorance of the Davidians' beliefs, combined with aggressive and bloodthirsty tactics, turned a tense but manageable standoff into a full-scale disaster. While obviously Koresh was not a good person, I'm not as upset about the lack of morality from a cult leader than the complete lack of competency, morality, and value of human life by our government. They should be held to a higher standard. Their job is to protect us, to protect American citizens, to protect the innocent, and not to burn them alive and dance on their corpses. We remember the victims to make sure that we will never allow them to make the same mistakes again.
If you die, you tell me, if you die from that wound, I want you to tell me what's going to happen.
Well, I'm not going to be around anymore, am I, to influence anybody, right?
Well, David, listen.
No, Jim, listen.
This has been painful for us. Come on.
Listen, Jim. There's nothing that hurts me more than being called a cult leader, all right? If I'm wrong, people like me don't deserve to live, okay?
Listen.
You understand me, Jim. If you let the people think, because, they're all scared around here now. Don't burn our building down.
No, we won't do that.
Don't shoot us all up. They've got to have that time.
But David, if you die, you're leaving your people helpless.
Look, they're God's people.
But if
I'm just an instrument, okay? I show them out of a book what God teaches. It is for them to decide.
If you got to this point in the video, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. This video was a long time in the making. I started writing this before the Ruby Ridge one, and then I realized that the Ruby Ridge one would really need to come out before this because I had both planned, and so I scrapped work on this and went to work on the Ruby Ridge one, then finished this one afterwards, and yeah, I tried to get this out. I'm trying to edit all of this in one day, write, edit, and record all in one day, which is almost impossible. We'll see if I can do it. If you're watching this, it's out. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. Don't forget to leave a like, subscribe, do all the silly, ridiculous YouTube stuff. And I will try to have my next video out as soon as possible, hopefully within a week again. I'm going to try and stay to the weekly schedule. I don't know how possible that is, because these take a lot of work and there's a lot of stuff that goes into it, but I will do my very best. I'm not entirely sure what the next one's going to be on, but I think maybe Benghazi. Don't hold me to that. I'm doing Benghazi at some point, just maybe not next week. Always remember, stay safe, stay strapped, and I will see you in the next video.